Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Led by Life. We're your hosts. I'm Rafaela, and this is Hannah. If you haven't been to the podcast before, welcome. Hannah and I talk about all things human design, the gene keys, our contemplation and meditations, and sort of just our experiences of how we process and synthesize each gene key, each gate, each gift, each shadow, and how it either shows up in our lives and how we relate to it. So welcome. Today we're on gate 23. The gate of assimilation. And at its shadow, it is complexity. At its gift, it is simplicity. And at its siddhi, it's, you're going to have to say this word because I can't.
Quintessence.
Quintessence.
And I was relating it to quintessential. Like you don't hear the word quintessence very often, but we hear quintessential. I want to look that up.
Yeah, we might have to, because I've heard that pronunciation or that word, quintessential.
Quintessential, yeah.
Yeah. But not quintessence. Quintessence. Yeah. And just before Hannah and I started today, we were kind of, going over and talking, and I mentioned that I felt like I had just recently read over this gene key in this gate, and so I didn't really know how it landed, like maybe not having sat and contemplated or just let it sit with me. So I don't really know exactly like how to articulate it, which I think is quite interesting because is it the programming partner or just the other gate that makes up the channel?
What's that? Sorry,
the 43.
I don't know if it's the programming partner. I don't think it is.
I think it is. But yeah. Hannah will have a look. And my point is that 43.
It is the programming partner.
Yeah. And so the 43 comes down from the ajna and it connects to the 23 that's coming out of the throat center. And it's sort of this process of like being able to have these like breakthrough insights that come through and then clearly articulate them. And when reading through the 23, and it's just talking about being able to like say things very clearly to the point, very simplistic. It has this quality. He relates a lot to like the teachings of the Buddha. And I felt very much like I could relate to a lot of what was being shared just because I have a defined throat. You have a defined throat. Did you feel the same way?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, like the fact that neither of us have this gene key or this gate defined, yet we both have the defined throat center. And I'm just, as you were saying it, I'm just kind of feeling into, it seems like a similar dynamic with some of the other channels we've looked at. Like, I know we haven't gone into the 4764, which connects the head center to the ajna, but we've talked about it a lot because I have that channel, and it's a similar sort of process, like this confusion or this processing that's happening. And then it comes through in a realization, and yet that's not always articulated because it's not connected to the throat, but together we make up that connection. So I'm just kind of feeling into this like similarity between other channels, and even like we talked about in the last one, the 22, what does that connect with? Whatever, I don't remember. That one, emotional solar plexus. But this like feeling of like then articulating the emotion, like the emotion might be a little bit more unaware, unconscious, and then through the connection with the channel, it then becomes articulated and expressed. And it just makes me think of how like everything in the chart is leading towards throat center to come out and be expressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it just reminded me of So when we did the circuitry workshop together and we were going through this channel and very like a lot of the other, just a lot of other experiences, but I remember this one in particularly because there is something in here about at its shadow, sometimes people don't, they say the right thing at the wrong time, or they say the wrong thing and then it's not received well, or something like that, right? And I remember saying like, oh, I've had times, you know, if we're talking about it in this shadow expression where I've blurted things out just from like a knowing of them, but they haven't been at the most appropriate times. And it's done some damage, so to speak, in that moment to, you know, what was happening and the person that I was speaking to. And it's so clear. Like, I feel like I have such a visceral memory of what that impact can be. And then you add on all the other things that we've learned with our energetics of being manifestors and having defined throats and you know, making an impact and having this closed aura. And so all of these things. And then when I reflect back at that moment, I'm like, damn, like I had already felt so much like guilt and just felt very apologetic afterwards of like the presentation in which that all kind of fell through in. And so that kind of like got brought up to me today as I was like reading this and some of the expressions in the shadow and what that looks like, but also how in that workshop and even sometimes when you and I are together or when I'm like being in a really creative moment with others, I'll have a lot of insights and like I feel like I can not only feel them drop in or come through, but I can see them layer. And in that workshop, that's what I was witnessing. We were going through a particular energy and channel and its circuitry, and I saw how like fast all of these components were laying on top of one another. And then because I don't have the 23, sometimes I feel like I'll go to speak it, and sometimes I feel like I don't even make sense.
And yet you do have it from your ajna to the throat center.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that it still comes out. It's just a different frequency because of the different channel. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what circuit is it in as well? Because this is in the individual circuit, isn't it?
Right, which you just reminded me of, like, even as you were just sharing that, I thought I had the same thought, like, oh yeah, and it's also in the individual circuitry.
And projected, right? So it would require an element of invitation to come out and to be received.
Well, and then not only that, but for myself, I know we're not at the 43, but I have a hanging gate, right? I have the 43 defined. So I'll have these moments of insight and breakthrough. But sometimes don't have a way to communicate them, or what it even says it here. It says, gate 43 carries a fear of rejection. Without 23, you may wonder how to clearly communicate your breakthrough insights. And so you kind of just reminded me how not only is it in the individual circuit, but for me, it's activated twice on both my body and my personality side. Yeah. And it's activated twice by Pluto, which is all about like, you know, transformation and like, I think of it like the underworld, so to speak, but a lot of subconscious and all of that stuff. And so for me, it really is an individual process where I'll be just doing my thing, or I'll be in a self-reflective kind of moment where I'm doing a lot of journaling, and I'll have these connections just kind of come through, or I'm out in the world and something will just like drop in. but it's a very personal process. And you're right, not until it's projected is it able to be like shared effectively or received in the best way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And something else that came to me and I've just lost it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, the Pluto thing.
Yeah.
The activated by Pluto. So Pluto must be a slow planet, is it? I don't know. I'm not that well versed in astrology, but because I've noticed, like in my chart as well, on both sides, it's the same gate, same line. Is yours the same line that it's activated in on both sides? So I imagine transit's quite slow for it to stay in that place. I don't really know what I'm talking about here in terms of the movement of. You know what I'm saying? Do you know?
I feel like you might be tapping into something that you've like maybe didn't even really know that you might know, only because I've never heard you talk about planets and movement the way you just did.
Right. Well, I know that it's like all of the placement, all of the definition in our chart is based off the position of the planets at the time of our birth. And that's like what energy that we're imprinted with. And that's why it's so important to have like our time and date of birth when we're gathering this energy.
So it's interesting because I'm looking at it here and it's actually activated. So it's activated 3 times in the sense that by Pluto twice and then also by Mercury. So in my personality side, it's both activated by Mercury and Pluto in the 5th and 6th line. But then on my, say that again.
Which line is which? So which one is Mercury? The 5th?
Oh, okay. The 5th.
Yeah.
And Pluto the 6th. But then on the body side, it's activated by Pluto just 1 time in the 2nd line.
Oh, different line. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe and this is probably me just seeing through my personal perspective. Because mine is 1.3 on both sides in Pluto. Like my Pluto is 1.3 on both sides. So I just was like, oh, maybe it's the same for everyone. But okay, now I just want to look at a bunch of different charts.
Yeah, well, and I did that too. So sometimes before each episode, I'll like go through all of the ones that I have saved, because for more or less all of the ones I have saved, I have personal relationships with those people. So I'll go through and I'll see, just to give it some more, like, give me some more insight or understanding or whatever of like how that shows up.
So this is a really funny pattern now that I'm seeing with both of us, is this like wanting to really understand and learn these different things about human design and the gene keys, but neither of us have a 1 in our profile. And I remember I watched a video on, so I'm a 2-4, Raf is a 2-5 profile.
No, you have backwards. I'm a 2-4, you're a 2-5.
I call myself, oh, coming out sideways. Anyway, I remember watching the 2-5 video, and the person saying it said that as a 2, it's not actually correct for you to want to study a lot and learn a lot and like find out all this information, because things just kind of come naturally to you as a 2, and you don't know why you know these things or how to do these things. And so I was really confused by that, because when it comes to human design, I want to know everything. And I remember asking Nikki, our teacher, about that, and she's like, if you are really excited about human design, or you're really into this and you want to learn about it, like, just do it. I mean, and I guess that's the ego authority. Just do what you want to do. If you want to learn about it, if you're really excited about it, do it. But it was just interesting because what I'm wondering is if this is the ajna actually at play here, this wanting to like understand and know things and conceptualize things. And yeah, because I know you have that same thing too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, I think that with anybody who might experience it too, and this is just because this is how it comes up for me. I take in the information to the extent that I'm like really loving it, and I feel it's so just like lighting me up, and I'm like motivated, and I'm like really, I have this drive to do it. I know that sometimes though, like there's this like moment where I'll have to check in, like, am I taking in the information or the material because I feel that I'm inadequate, or because I fear that like what I know is not enough? Like it's mind-blowing to me how sometimes I'll read a particular thing. This usually happens a lot more when I'm like on Instagram or when I'm like on YouTube or something, where I will want to know a particular thing about something. And within seconds, minutes of me being on that platform, I'll get the only thing that I really needed. And then that one tool, I'll utilize that tool or that technique or whatever it is for so long. And I'll just kind of, in my own way of having this like quality of being a natural, just take it and run with it and make it however it fits me, with not knowing a whole lot about that technique or that style. And it usually works out, sometimes I think pretty well.
Well, I have the same thing as well, but it's more so for things like if I'm wanting to cook something or bake something, I'll just
Right.
glance and then I don't follow it. I don't follow recipes. I don't follow instructions. I don't like to follow instructions unless I have to. Like if we're building a flat pack, something, unfortunately, we have to kind of follow the instructions. But I don't like doing it. I'd rather just do it myself and figure it out myself.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I really feel my like the natural energy.
Right.
But I'm wondering then also if it's a combination, this like curiosity about human design and the gene keys and wanting to know and understand how it all works and how it all fits together. I wonder if it's then a combination of like different parts of my chart. So like this defined ajna that's always thinking and like doesn't stop, doesn't turn off. And then also this like part of, in my identity center, this just like really wanting to understand myself and know myself and like, I wonder if it's a combination of those things that are fueling this curiosity.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that it has to be all of it, I mean, on some degree. I'm just thinking about what you said in relation to like the 23rd gate and that in this quality. And it's funny because at the gift it's simplicity. And yet at sometimes like, not that our conversations I think are complicated, but sometimes maybe in our wanting to understand or just in wanting to connect it all, because we do have these defined ajnas, which is where the 43 comes out of, right? Or where this 23 is connected to, is like there's just this quality of wanting to piece together the puzzle. And yet on the other end of that, like, is it maybe already all put together? And that,
or are there things that you cannot make sense of?
Right.
You really know.
Right. And there's this this teaching in the 23 about being in like the middle road, essentially. Like there's a left path and a right path, and then there's this middle path, and even the emotional side of our beings might be a little bit closer to this middle path, but not really ever there. And then, the left the logical is just that way and doesn't really ever get too close to the middle. And the middle way is something that is really unexplainable or can't be talked about or expressed. It's sort of just an experience again, or just happens. And even trying to articulate it right now or communicate it, I'm just like, what's the sense?
Well, he talks about the mind being where the complexity lies, like in our advanced human minds that are, so complex. And I was laughing. I don't know if you noticed at the start when you hit record, I was like laughing because it's almost like we would, we were talking about this thing and then we were talking about that thing. And then we were like, are we ready to go? And then we're like, hang on a sec, let me just move my plan and like adjust things. And I was laughing because I was like, we're making this so much more complicated than it needs to be. And I was thinking about this morning, not in terms of complexity, but I was thinking about my own shadow when it comes to like my personality sun gate and how serious I can be sometimes. And then I was just thinking about how related the shadow frequencies are in all of the gene keys. Like I can see how seriousness relates to complexity, like making things more complex than they need to be. And then, all the different shadows that we've talked about. But it just kind of occurred to me this morning as I was driving in the car, just thinking about the fact that like, we as humans just make things so much more complex and more serious than they need to be. And,
Yeah. Well, and so this like this gift of simplicity, he refers to it, Richard Rudd, of it being like even something that people with this gate may exhibit in like their home or in the things that they do or their areas or just the aura of themselves that they carry. And this is where in some way I felt like when I was reading it was like, okay, I can see that, because sometimes I think that I live a pretty simple life. Some people would probably disagree with that in a way. But I was thinking about my spaces, and particularly even the room that I'm in now, like the furniture that I'm physically in right now and the thing behind me are the only things really in this room. And in my bedroom there's like really just bed and nightstand, and then in my living space there's some like what I would just call essentials. Like I don't have a lot of things, and I felt like that was sort of this physical representation of living sort of a little bit more simple. And also, as I'm saying this, I just wonder if that's because I also don't like decorating. So I just don't bother with it. But then I look at some other spaces of people, and I'm just like, oh, that looks so wonderful. Like I would love to live in that. But I don't put the effort to do it.
So it's kind of this idea of like our belongings, our things being almost like clutter that we own. And then it makes me think of like mental clutter when there's too much going on in the mind, and how like, I feel like, because I've been over the last 7 or so years decluttering my life, removing clutter. And I've also been really drawn to simplifying like my mind, mindfulness, meditation, being more present, not having too many tabs open up here. And like that can be hard sometimes with a defined ajna, because there isn't that off switch. Like it's always something's always going on up there. But it just makes me think of how like simplifying not just our environment, but also our perspectives, our thoughts, the way we see the world, like all of this.
Yeah. Well, and that's in that quality too of this gate of being able to speak in terms that is simple and very, he even says it like straight to the point. And it's interesting because in the last week or so, maybe even couple weeks, I've been thinking to myself, how do I practice speaking more to the point? And I think that this is where this gets caught up for me. Like sometimes, like, yes, I do have a connection that brings my ajna to my throat, but I've also heard that each throat gate has its own voice. And so sometimes I just really wonder, like, how can I say things more straight to the point, very simple? Because I can be wordy. I could like say things in so many different ways. And sometimes I know when I've done too much in my expression, when somebody will look at me and like, what did you even like, what does that mean? Like, what did you say? And I'll have to, then that's, you know, my cue to be like, okay, hold on, let me simplify this. But for me, it's like, I think because not having the 23, that I can get a bit wordy and a bit complex in the things that I say, and they don't always need to be.
Well, you also, if I remember correctly, that 1156 channel is all about storytelling. So you have this like ability you're a natural storyteller. So, you know, I can see how that would then, depending on what it is that you're sharing, sometimes get a little bit wordier, you know, because you're telling a story. And sometimes there is a need for that to be a little bit more expressive or a little bit.
Yeah. You need to tell the details. I just remember when I was younger, my family would just know that I could tell a story with every detail. My stories were so long. So long. Yeah. I would know like the first and last name of everybody in the story.
Wow.
That like nobody needs to know their last name.
And I notice myself doing it sometimes, like being more wordier than I need to be. And I think that's my process of like understanding, getting to the point of what I actually understand is through talking it out. But it's like, yeah, maybe sometimes I just do that to myself in my own world. So I'm not like boring everyone with my details that are not necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's interesting how like all of these different expressions, all these different like energies and frequencies have like their own like you like literally uniqueness, right?
Yeah.
Each one sort of represents a different type of fear or a different type of way of being, or just, and I think that that's what I love about the fact that it's called the 64 ways of being, right? I don't have the book in front of me.
Ways, yeah. I don't
The
know.
64 ways, something like that. Yeah. And that on some level, because there is a simplicity, I think, to the gene keys, everybody can relate in some degree. And this, I think, goes back to something we might have said last week or touched on, was that we are all of it, even though we have parts that are defined for ourselves. That's not to say that we won't experience others. Like even here, where I have the 43, but not the 23. And even in itself, like that carries a relationship of how things show up in this energy for myself.
And it brings me back to something we talked about in the circuitry workshop as well, about if you have a split or if you don't have like a full connection, sometimes it's not to say that you can't still articulate yourself or say something or share an idea. It's just that it will come out differently depending on who you're in the presence of or who's the one receiving that information or that whatever it is that you're sharing. Because I remember feeling so confused that my 64th gate is in my Mercury. It's something that's wanting to be communicated, but I'm like, I don't have a connection to my throat. Like, how do I share ideas or whatever it is? And I just remember Nikki saying, like, it'll still come out. It'll just come out in a different way, depending on who you're talking to. I noticed that happening. I'm not sure if you notice this, but if I'm doing like a live call with some coaching clients and I've prepared my notes, I think I know what I'm going to say, and then it just, something different comes out. It doesn't come out in a way that I would normally say it, or the way that I had prepared or thought that I was going to say it. But then it's like trusting that that's coming out in the way that it needs to, in order for it to land and to make sense to that other person. So that was really interesting as well.
Yeah. You know, you sort of just reminded me how, again, like this channel is in the individual circuitry. And what I've come to learn also is like where you have that split or that hanging gate, you know, in whichever way it's going, if it's going, you know, my point is that maybe in the undefined, is there a unique process that you're here to kind of go through a journey on either end of how that energy is flowing, right? And it reminded me how I've had within the last couple years some pretty profound personal breakthroughs and insights that sort of just came to me. And it was projected because, I mean, I'm sitting in the car with my mom, and it's kind of hard for me to hide when I'm feeling a particular way, and she can sense it. And so she asked, and I went into sharing it with her, and how it all like sort of dropped in for me when I made these really big realizations and connections for myself as far as like my dynamics with men in my life. And I was like crying hysterically, and I was just like saying, like, it was like literally just all coming out of me. And I remember she was like she was driving, and she kind of just had this like overwhelming confusion that, and I think she knew this, like she couldn't help me in this process. Like she just got it so that it came out, like she was that like invitation to let it be, but she couldn't really understand the depth of what that was. And again, it was like this, and we haven't really ever spoken about it. We just know that happened, and have kind of touched on it, but never really needed to go back to it. And, you know, even like, for example, yesterday, so I'm rewatching Ted Lasso for the third time. If you haven't watched Ted Lasso, like, I think you need to stop what you're watching and you need to turn this on now.
Watching the new season. Sorry, I'm just pouring myself some tea.
Yeah, say that again.
Season.
Have I started the new season?
Seen it.
Yeah, I've seen all of it.
Oh, okay. I haven't. I'm not up to date.
Yeah. So I've seen all of it, but there's this part where this, you know, Roy's niece, Phoebe, she's being told that Roy and Keely are breaking up. And they're talking, and she says, well, my parents broke up or split up when I was 4 years old. So I've had this core belief that nothing lasts forever. And I've seen this show twice now. Okay. And this is one of those things where you can rewatch something, like you'll see something new or whatever. And for some reason, like in that moment, it hit me so personally that my wheels just were turning, and I was just thinking about things in a way that I maybe have thought about it before, but never really with the exact words that she had expressed them in. And yeah, again, and then Travis is in the house. So I paused the TV, and I'm like, you know, and I just kind of like start going. And I can tell that like he gets what I'm saying, but maybe not really in a way, but just gives me the space to process because it's just sort of like coming through in a way, and it, he's right next to me and I wanted to express it. So I did, not that he needed to do anything with the information, just sort of just like held the space there for me to like express. But yeah, these things will happen. And so for me, I, especially with the definition that I have with the 43 and where it's located and what it's kind of flavored by, I'm noticing now that like not having the 23rd gate is, again, like you said, not good or bad. It really just, because if it's going down, then I have this insight. And then the 23rd is more so of this, like, maybe this teaching for me to go through of when it is the best time or moment to let that be expressed. And really, is it more so of, because like you said, it's a projected energy, is it more so of me having that, and then the 23 and the openness, allowing for myself to give the space for it to be projected out and then expressed. I don't know.
Well, it kind of just, what it makes me feel is that like everyone just wants to express themselves, and everyone has something to share and something to express, and it's just finding the ways that we uniquely operate in order to express ourselves best, in order to feel like we're understood. Because I think that that's what this channel is really all about, is like, it seems to me that it has some pretty profound insights to share, but it's not always, if the timing's not right, it's not always received best, and people can be seen as, I mean, it's called the Genius Freak channel, right?
Genius to freak.
Oh, Genius to Freak, right. So it's like, if people say things and perhaps it's not the right time, perhaps it's not invited out, then they might come across as a bit of a freak. Like, what did you just say? Even if there's like a lot of truth in what it is that they have to share. And so I think he even talks about this shadow of like fear of being rejected, this fear of like, if we say what's on our mind, that we may be rejected, that we may not be understood, that we may be kind of, it just goes back to like all of the shadow frequencies are rooted in fear of not surviving, because if we are rejected, or if what we have to say is not received, like welcomed by the tribe, then we can be kind of cast aside as a freak and be a bit of an outsider. And yeah, that's just kind of what came to me, is like this just deep human need to express ourselves.
Yeah.
And it is individual circuitry, so it's a very individual expression of self, which feels, for me particularly, feels very vulnerable, because so much of my circuitry is individual, and it is a place of like, I suppose, wounding for me is like wanting to express myself. It comes out a different voice. Mine comes out in a creative self-expression, and it's connected to my heart, so it really comes from like the truth of who I am. But I can see how that would relate to so many of the voices of the throat center.
Yeah, you reminded me about how also what has been shared in this is that this is also a really big part where a lot of the collective is in its shadow. And even more recently, where everybody has something to share and express, or people just talk about everything, or just feel like they have this need to express exactly how they feel and what they want and what they like and what they don't like. And in some way, like, is that really serving all of us as well? And I just, I was thinking about, things we've talked about as I was reading this, and back to like this whole social media thing and platforms, and where you can truly just say anything at any time, whatever you like. And I don't know, I just thought maybe because there is such almost feels like an infinite opportunity for that, makes it so that we are a little bit less actually heard, or maybe even taken a little bit less seriously, because there are less boundaries on the container in which someone can say or do or express whatever. And so a lot of it gets lost in translation. And this is one of my personal things with Instagram, and a lot of whatever everyone is sharing on there. And I could probably go on for that about, but I think you get my point.
I think it's spot on. And I think I was thinking the exact same thing, that we see this shadow on social media. Like everyone has something to say. And going back to the truth that I do believe everyone in a way has something to say, but maybe it's not like actually expressing it or expressing your opinions and your ideas. Maybe it's expressing what you have to say in a different way. And this is why a system like human design or the gene keys, like this wisdom, can really help us to know ourselves and to have that self-awareness of what is being asked of us, or what life does want us to express and share, what it is that we are here to contribute. Because where we have that definition, it's wanting to be shared, it's wanting to be, it's a gift that we give to the world. Whereas where we have that openness is where we receive, and where we listen, and where we learn, and where we gain that wisdom. So yeah, I just think that, I know we've talked about this before, and I wonder if it was the channel 1-8 that we went into. I feel like it was, this like individuality or self-expression. And we talked about how like having the awareness of what it is that you're here to share and what it is that you're here to express can help to like, avoid everyone just sharing for the sake of it. Yeah. And just same thing because of that like mediocrity. I think that's where we were talking about it.
Well, and you just highlighted another like very interesting part of this energy that I'm being reminded of, is that there is a need for self-reflection in here. And without the self-reflection, let me correct that, I meant self-awareness, and without the self-awareness, can you really truly see where something's coming from, like internally? And that's one of the things, he relates this to those concepts of like being deaf and blind. These two kind of energies go back and forth in that shadow of, if there isn't this idea of self-awareness, then maybe we're blind to our own process. And if we're just sort of speaking without the presence and being mindful and acknowledging what's in front of us, then we're just deaf. And so I think, like a big part of this energy, this circuit, this experience is this quality of having a degree of self-awareness.
Totally. And I think that relates so much back to the simplicity, because it's being like really intentional with our words and with what it is that we share. And what was coming to me when I was reading it as well was the 4 agreements, being impeccable with our words. And sometimes we don't have things to share, so we don't share them. Sometimes we don't need to express our opinions.
So good.
Yeah.
That really got rounded out really well. Well, thank you, Hannah, for this conversation, and thank you everyone for listening.
An interesting one. We'll see what comes up with the next one. And
if you guys have any personal reflections or insights of how this shows up in your own chart, please let us know. We'd love to hear it, and wish you all the best. Take care.